Some names were never meant to be spoken, and on one unforgettable night, a single word from an ordinary waitress silenced an entire kingdom hidden beneath the surface of the modern world. The Grand Ashcroft Ballroom in downtown Boston shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers that scattered warm golden light across polished marble floors. Guests in elegant black suits and flowing evening gowns drifted through the room with effortless grace, while a string quartet filled the air with soft classical music. To everyone outside, it looked like another exclusive charity gala attended by the city's wealthiest families. Taylor Brooks knew better than to ask questions. She was 26, worked double shifts to keep up with rent, and tonight was simply another catering assignment that promised a few extra dollars in tips. Her black serving uniform fit well enough, though the shoes pinched after nearly 10 hours on her feet. She reminded herself that expensive parties always ended eventually. Survive the shift, collect the paycheck, go home. That simple routine had never failed her before. Table 12 needs fresh champagne, her supervisor whispered as she hurried past. And don't touch anything on the display tables. Those artifacts are worth more than this entire building. Taylor nodded politely before lifting a silver tray filled with crystal flutes. Along the ballroom's eastern wall stood a long display of ancient books, engraved boxes, weathered maps, and ceremonial objects loaned by private collectors. Small brass plaques sat beside each artifact so guests could admire their history without touching anything. Taylor barely glanced at them while weaving between conversations about investments, politics, and charitable foundations. Yet something caught her eye. One wooden display box had been left slightly open, revealing an aged parchment inside unlike the others. Instead of English or Latin, elegant black letters curved across the faded page in a language she had never seen before. Somehow the symbols didn't feel unfamiliar. They felt strangely readable. She slowed almost without realizing it. A guest reached across the display, accidentally nudging the information card onto the floor. Taylor quickly stepped forward, balancing her tray against one arm before crouching to retrieve it. "Thank you," an elderly woman smiled before moving away. Taylor placed the card back beside the parchment, but curiosity tugged at her one last time. The brass label listed only one sentence: translation unknown, original name preserved. Beneath it, the same flowing letters appeared again. Without thinking, she quietly sounded them out exactly as they appeared. The pronunciation rolled naturally from her lips, smooth and effortless, as though she had practiced it her entire life. The effect was immediate. The violinists stopped playing in the middle of a note. Conversations died before words could finish. Glasses froze halfway toward waiting hands. Hundreds of eyes turned toward Taylor at exactly the same moment. Complete silence swallowed the ballroom. Taylor blinked, confused by the sudden stillness. She lowered the tray slightly, searching the room for whatever emergency had interrupted the evening. No fire alarm, no announcement, no accident, only silence. The elderly woman who had thanked her moments earlier slowly backed away, her face drained of color. Across the ballroom, several distinguished guests exchanged stunned glances before lowering their heads. Others stared at Taylor with expressions somewhere between disbelief and fear. Even the security staff appeared uncertain whether to move. The air itself seemed colder. Taylor looked back toward the parchment. Had she mispronounced something, embarrassed herself? "I'm sorry," she offered quietly, her voice almost echoing inside the enormous room. No one answered. Then, less than 30 feet away, a tall man in a perfectly tailored black suit closed the antique book he had been reading. Unlike everyone else, he hadn't looked surprised. He had simply stood very still. His pale face remained calm, almost unreadable, while silver-gray eyes settled on Taylor with unsettling focus. She had never seen him before, yet something about the quiet authority surrounding him made the entire ballroom seem to shift around his presence. No introduction was necessary. People instinctively stepped aside as he began walking toward her. What Taylor Brooks didn't know was that every vampire in that ballroom had just heard a name erased from history more than 600 years earlier. And the man now approaching her wasn't merely another distinguished guest. He was Leonardo Vitale, the vampire king who had personally sworn that no living soul would ever speak that ancient name again. Taylor Brooks remained frozen beside the display table, her fingers still wrapped around the silver tray as hundreds of silent eyes refused to leave her. The absence of music made every tiny sound feel unnaturally loud. Somewhere near the ballroom entrance, a champagne glass gently touched polished marble, producing a delicate chime that echoed through the room before disappearing into the silence. She searched the faces around her, hoping someone would laugh and explain that she had accidentally interrupted an elaborate ceremony or private performance. Instead, every expression carried the same unsettling mixture of disbelief and caution. Several guests quietly stepped backward as though invisible lines had suddenly been drawn across the floor. Others lowered their gaze completely, refusing to look at either Taylor or the ancient parchment. She had worked enough luxury events to recognize awkward moments, but nothing had ever felt like this. Then the man continued walking toward her. His pace was calm and deliberate, neither hurried nor hesitant. Every step seemed to restore order without anyone speaking a single word. As he passed, elegantly dressed guests instinctively moved aside, creating a clear path through the crowded ballroom. Nobody introduced him, nobody needed to. Whatever authority he possessed reached far beyond wealth or reputation. Taylor noticed the subtle details first. His tailored black suit looked perfectly ordinary until light touched its fabric, revealing patterns woven so faintly they almost disappeared. His dark hair was neatly combed, and his pale complexion seemed untouched by the warmth filling the ballroom. Most striking of all were his eyes. They were not cold, they were careful, studying every movement around her with remarkable precision. He finally stopped a few feet away. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Taylor forced herself to break the silence. "Did I say something wrong?" Her voice sounded much smaller than she intended. The man looked briefly toward the parchment before returning his "Exactly what you read." His tone remained composed, carrying neither accusation nor reassurance. Taylor glanced down at the display. "I honestly do not know. I just sounded out the letters." There was a translation card beside it. She pointed toward the brass plaque. The man's gaze shifted to the label, "Translation unknown, original name preserved." A nearly invisible change crossed his expression before disappearing again. "There is no translation," he said quietly. "There never has been." Taylor frowned. "Then how did I pronounce it?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he carefully picked up the information card and examined it for only a second before placing it back exactly where it had been. "That is precisely the question." Around them, conversation still had not resumed. Guests waited with remarkable discipline, pretending not to watch while clearly listening to every word. Taylor suddenly became aware that every security guard in the ballroom had subtly changed positions. They were no longer watching the exits. They were watching her. She shifted her weight uneasily. "Look, if I caused a problem, I really am sorry." The man regarded her quietly before offering the faintest nod. "I believe you." Those 3 words somehow eased the tension inside her more than she expected. "My name is Leonardo Vitale," he continued. "I oversee the preservation of several historical collections displayed here tonight." It sounded like a reasonable explanation. Yet something about the careful way he chose every word suggested there was much more he was deliberately leaving unsaid. "Taylor Brooks," she replied. "Miss Brooks, have you ever seen that language before tonight?" "Never. Studied ancient history?" "No, linguistics." She smiled nervously. "The closest thing I have studied lately is balancing grocery bills." For the first time, something almost resembling amusement softened his face. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Would you mind trying to read another line?" Taylor looked uncertain. "If that caused all of this, maybe I should not." Leonardo followed her gaze toward the silent crowd, an understandable concern. Before anyone else could move, an older gentleman hurried toward them carrying a leather portfolio. His expensive tuxedo could not hide the anxiety in his hurried breathing. He leaned close enough that only Leonardo could hear his whisper. "Your Majesty." The elderly man stopped himself almost instantly, correcting his words before anyone nearby reacted. "Mr. Vital, the archive curator reports that the original manuscript should not have been displayed. It was locked this afternoon." Leonardo accepted the portfolio without changing expression. "Who authorized the replacement?" "No one knows." Taylor caught only fragments of the conversation, but one sentence reached her clearly. The original manuscript should not have been displayed. Confusion settled deeper inside her chest. She looked back toward the wooden display case. The parchment that had been lying inside only moments earlier was gone. No one had approached it. No one had touched it. Yet the ancient page had completely disappeared, leaving only an empty velvet lining beneath the ballroom lights. Unfortunately for Taylor Brooks, that missing parchment was only the beginning of a mystery that had remained hidden for more than 6 centuries. The empty display case reflected the ballroom lights like a polished mirror. revealing nothing except dark velvet where the ancient parchment had rested only moments before. Taylor Brooks stared at it in disbelief, wondering whether exhaustion had begun playing tricks on her eyes. She knew exactly where she had seen the fragile page. She knew exactly what she had read, yet now there was no trace that it had ever existed. Around her, conversation slowly returned in carefully measured whispers. Guests resumed holding champagne glasses and exchanging polite smiles, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Every laugh sounded rehearsed. Every movement felt deliberate. Whatever had happened, everyone except Taylor seemed to understand that it was never supposed to be discussed aloud. Leonardo Vitali closed the leather portfolio the elderly curator had delivered and offered him a nearly invisible nod. The older man immediately stepped away without another word, disappearing into the crowd with surprising speed. Taylor noticed how easily people obeyed Leonardo without asking questions. It was something deeper, something built over many years. "Miss Brooks," Leonardo said calmly, "would you walk with me for a few minutes?" She hesitated. Every instinct reminded her that following an unfamiliar man through an exclusive ballroom was not the smartest decision, yet remaining where she stood felt even stranger. She glanced toward her supervisor, who simply looked away the instant their eyes met. No help would come from there. "Am I in trouble?" she asked quietly. "No," Leonardo answered, "but I believe you deserve answers, even if I cannot provide all of them tonight." His honesty caught her off guard. He had not promised the truth. He had only admitted its limits. Taylor nodded once and followed him through a side corridor hidden behind heavy velvet curtains. The music gradually faded behind thick wooden doors until only the quiet hum of the building's ventilation remained. The hallway beyond contrasted sharply with the glittering ballroom. Soft wall sconces cast warm pools of light across old stone floors, polished by generations of careful maintenance. Framed black and white photographs lined the walls, documenting decades of charity galas, museum exhibitions, and distinguished visitors. Yet one detail stood out immediately. Leonardo appeared in none of them. Hundreds of photographs stretched back nearly a century, but the man walking beside her was absent from every frame. "This building is older than it looks," Leonardo said, noticing her attention drift toward the photographs. "Some parts date back to the late 1800s. Taylor smiled politely. "You sound like you have given this tour before." Only when necessary. They reached a heavy oak door guarded by no one. Leonardo opened it himself, revealing a quiet reading room filled with towering bookshelves, antique lamps, and long wooden tables. It felt less like part of a hotel and more like a forgotten library hidden inside the building. A faint scent of leather, cedar, and aging paper filled the air. Taylor stepped inside cautiously. "This place is beautiful. Very few people know it exists." Leonardo closed the door behind them with a gentle click. There were no locks, no chains, nothing threatening. Even so, the silence surrounding the room carried unusual weight. Taylor wandered toward one of the shelves, scanning titles printed in faded gold lettering. Most were historical records, language studies, and private museum catalogues. Nothing appeared supernatural. Nothing explained why an entire ballroom had fallen silent because of a single spoken name. "You still believe this is about pronunciation," Leonardo observed. "Is it not?" she asked. He looked at her carefully before answering. "Tell me exactly what you experienced when you saw those letters." Taylor thought for a moment. "It sounds ridiculous, but they did not feel unfamiliar. I had never seen that language before. Yet somehow I knew how the word should sound. It was almost like reading English," she continued. "Natural, effortless." His expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "And afterward? Nothing. Everyone else reacted. I did not." Leonardo slowly walked toward a glass cabinet standing against the far wall. Inside rested dozens of handwritten manuscripts protected beneath crystal panels. He unlocked the cabinet and carefully removed a weathered leather folder. Without speaking, he opened it across the reading table. Inside lay several pages covered with symbols remarkably similar to those Taylor had seen in the ballroom. "Would you try reading one line?" he asked. Taylor immediately shook her head. "After what happened out there? Nothing you say in this room can reach anyone beyond these walls." She studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. Instead, she found only patience. Taking a slow breath, she leaned over the manuscript. The elegant symbols looked strangely familiar again, but this time they refused to arrange themselves into recognizable sounds. They remained nothing more than beautiful ink upon old paper. She blinked twice, confused, then tried another line. Still nothing. "I cannot read any of it," she admitted. Leonardo quietly closed the folder. For the first time since they met, uncertainty appeared in his eyes. Whatever answer he expected, Taylor had just disproved it completely. At that exact moment, somewhere deep beneath the oldest foundation of the building, an ancient mechanism that had remained silent for 600 years awakened with a single, quiet click, and neither Taylor nor Leonardo realized they had already become part of something history had tried very hard to forget. Leonardo Vitale remained motionless for several seconds after closing the leather folder, his attention fixed not on the ancient manuscript but on Taylor Brooks herself. Whatever explanation he had expected had quietly disappeared the moment she failed to read the second text. The silence inside the reading room felt different now. It no longer carried certainty. It carried questions. Taylor folded her arms uneasily. "I thought you expected me to read it." "So did I," Leonardo admitted. "Then why could I read the other one?" "I do not know." The answer came without hesitation, making it strangely believable. Taylor had met enough people to recognize when someone was inventing confidence. Leonardo was doing the opposite. For the first time since they met, he appeared genuinely uncertain. He carefully returned the manuscript to its protective case before walking toward one of the tall windows overlooking the quiet streets below. Rain had begun falling over Boston, soft droplets turning the city lights into blurred ribbons of gold and white. "History is rarely lost by accident," he said without turning around. "Sometimes it disappears because someone believes the truth would cause greater harm than the lie." Taylor listened without interrupting. "The document you read tonight should never have been displayed," he continued. "It has been protected for generations. Only a handful of people even know it exists. Then someone wanted me to see it." Leonardo slowly faced her again. "Or someone wanted to discover whether you could read it." The thought settled heavily between them. Taylor replayed the evening in her mind. The slightly opened display case. The information card lying on the floor. The elderly guest distracting her for only a moment. Every detail that had seemed random now appeared carefully arranged. "You think someone planned this?" she asked. "I believe too many unlikely events occurred within the same few minutes." Before Taylor could respond, 3 quiet knocks echoed through the heavy oak door. Leonardo opened it just enough for an elderly woman dressed in a dark grey archive uniform to enter. She carried a narrow wooden box secured with brass clasps respectfully before placing it on the reading table. "Everything you requested, sir," she said softly. "No one has entered the lower archive tonight." Leonardo thanked her with a slight nod, and she departed without another question. Taylor watched the exchange with growing curiosity. "Everyone here seems to know you." Leonardo offered a faint smile. "I have worked with this collection for a very long time." It was technically an answer, yet somehow revealed almost nothing. He opened the wooden box. Inside rested dozens of handwritten index cards arranged alphabetically. Every card contained careful sketches of ancient symbols beside phonetic notes and historical references. Taylor leaned closer, fascinated by the meticulous handwriting. "These are pronunciation records," she asked. "Attempts," Leonardo corrected. "Centuries of attempts." He selected several cards and placed them before her. "Choose anyone." Taylor picked a card almost at random. The symbols looked beautiful but completely unfamiliar. She studied them for several seconds before shaking her head. Nothing. They still look like drawings. Leonardo replaced the card and selected another. Again, nothing. A third produced the same result. "I cannot read any of these," Taylor said apologetically. "Exactly." He closed the box with quiet precision. Whatever happened tonight was not simply an ability to understand an ancient language. Taylor rested both hands on the table. "Then what was it?" Leonardo looked toward the empty chair across from her as though searching 6 centuries of memory before answering. "Perhaps the language recognized something before you recognized it." Taylor frowned. "Languages do not recognize people. Most do not." His words lingered in the quiet room without explanation. Suddenly the lights overhead flickered once, then again. Neither of them moved. The old building settled with a deep vibration that seemed to travel upward through the stone floor itself. It was subtle enough that most people elsewhere would probably dismiss it as aging pipes or distant construction. Yet Leonardo's expression changed immediately. He walked to one corner of the room where an antique grandfather clock stood against the wall. Instead of placed his fingertips lightly against its carved wooden frame, the pendulum had stopped. "That should not be possible," he murmured almost to himself. Taylor stepped closer. "It is just an old clock." "No," Leonardo replied quietly. "It has not stopped in nearly 600 years. Before she could ask another question, a low chime echoed somewhere beneath the building. It sounded nothing like the ballroom orchestra or the hotel elevators. This tone was deeper, older. almost resonating through the stone itself. Taylor felt it more than heard it. A faint breeze drifted across the reading room, although every window remained closed. One of the nearby bookshelves released a soft mechanical click. Both of them turned at exactly the same moment. Slowly, almost silently, the enormous shelf began sliding away from the wall by only a few inches, revealing a narrow passage hidden behind centuries of carefully preserved books. What Taylor Brooks did not know was that no living person had opened that concealed entrance since the night history itself had been deliberately rewritten. The hidden passage remained perfectly still after the bookshelf completed its slow movement, revealing only darkness beyond the narrow opening. Dust floated lazily through the thin beam of light spilling from the reading room, making the air itself appear untouched by time. Taylor Brooks instinctively stepped closer before stopping herself. Every sensible thought warned her to leave. She was only a waitress working an evening shift. None of this belonged in her life, yet curiosity held her in place more firmly than fear. Leonardo Vital watched the concealed entrance with an expression she had not seen before. His calm composure remained, but something beneath it had changed. It was the look of someone confronting a memory he had hoped would remain buried forever. "Has that passage always been here?" Taylor asked quietly. "Yes," Leonardo answered, "but it was never meant to open again." He approached the entrance slowly, resting one hand against the ancient stone surrounding the opening. The wall felt cold, despite the warm temperature inside the room. Small carvings covered the stone, nearly invisible beneath centuries of dust. They were not decorative. They resembled the same elegant symbols Taylor had seen on the missing parchment. She leaned closer, expecting the strange familiarity to return. Instead, the markings remained unreadable, just as the other manuscripts had been. Leonardo noticed her expression. "Nothing?" She gently shook her head. "Nothing at all." He seemed almost relieved, though only for a moment. Together they stepped into the narrow corridor. Soft lights hidden along the ceiling slowly awakened one after another, not with modern electricity, but with a warm golden glow that spread ahead of them as if sensing their approach. The passage extended much farther than Taylor expected beneath the historic building. The walls were carved from smooth grey stone, interrupted by arched alcoves displaying empty pedestals, cracked glass cases, and faded banners whose colors had long surrendered to time. It felt less like a tunnel and more like a forgotten museum sealed beneath the city. Their footsteps echoed gently, becoming the only sound in the quiet space. "How old is this place?" Taylor whispered. "Older than the ballroom above us," Leonardo replied. "Older than the hotel, older than the streets surrounding it." She glanced toward him with growing disbelief. "How can something like this exist beneath downtown Boston?" "Because very few people know where to look." They continued deeper until the corridor widened into a circular chamber supported by 12 marble columns. In the center stood a large stone table covered by a transparent crystal dome. Beneath the dome rested a single bronze medallion engraved with an intricate crest unlike anything Taylor had ever seen. Around its edge ran another circle of unfamiliar symbols. Leonardo stopped several feet away without touching it. "This room has remained sealed since the archive was closed," he said softly. Taylor slowly circled the display. The craftsmanship looked impossibly detailed, every line preserved as though centuries had barely touched the metal. She lowered herself slightly to study the inscription more closely. Again, the symbols refused to become words. "I still cannot read them," she admitted. Leonardo nodded. "That is how it should be." Taylor looked back at him. "Then why bring me here?" Before he could answer, something caught her attention on the opposite wall. Hidden between 2 marble columns hung dozens of framed portraits stretching from floor to ceiling. Unlike the photographs upstairs, these paintings reached back through generations. Men and women dressed in clothing from different centuries stared outward with remarkably lifelike expressions. Taylor wandered toward them, admiring the extraordinary detail. Some appeared to be scholars, others wore ceremonial robes. One portrait showed a young woman standing beside shelves filled with ancient books, holding a rolled manuscript almost identical to the missing parchment from the ballroom. A small brass plaque beneath the painting had faded almost beyond recognition. Taylor brushed away a thin layer of dust with the edge of her sleeve. Most of the letters had disappeared, leaving only a single family name still visible. Brooks. She stared at it silently, convinced she had read it incorrectly. She looked again. The name remained exactly the same. Brooks. Her heartbeat quickened. Leonardo. He joined her beside the portrait. His eyes settled on the plaque before slowly lifting toward the painted woman's face. Unlike Taylor, he did not appear surprised. He appeared that name before. Taylor said. He remained silent for several long seconds. I have, he answered carefully, many years ago. Taylor turned back toward the portrait. The woman looked remarkably ordinary, light brown hair, calm blue eyes, simple clothing without jewelry or signs of nobility. She could easily have passed unnoticed in any modern crowd. Yet something about her gentle expression felt strangely familiar. Not identical, familiar. Is she related to me? Taylor asked. Leonardo did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied the faded plaque once more before quietly saying, the official records say that family line disappeared centuries ago. Taylor frowned. Official records? Yes. And unofficially? Leonardo lowered his voice almost to a whisper. Unofficially, history has always contained names someone wished to erase. At that exact moment, a faint breeze drifted through the chamber, although no doors had opened. One of the portraits shifted ever so slightly against the stone wall, revealing a narrow compartment hidden behind its frame. Inside rested a weathered envelope sealed with dark blue wax. Across its front, written in elegant handwriting untouched by time, appeared only 4 words. For Taylor Brooks alone, the weathered envelope remained untouched inside the narrow compartment, its dark blue wax seal completely intact, despite the centuries that had apparently passed since someone had placed it there. Taylor Brooks stared at her own name written across the front in elegant handwriting that looked far too fresh to belong in such an ancient chamber. She slowly reached toward it before stopping only inches away. "This cannot be real," she whispered. Leonardo Vitale stood beside her without attempting to take the envelope himself. His attention rested on the seal rather than the handwriting. An intricate crest had been pressed into the dark blue wax, its circular design surrounding the same graceful symbols Taylor had first encountered upstairs. "Do you recognize it?" Taylor asked. Leonardo answered after a thoughtful pause. "I recognize the seal. I have never seen the letter." She looked at him with growing confusion. "You have been here before, many times. Then how could you have missed something hidden behind the portrait?" His expression remained calm, because the compartment was never there. Taylor glanced back toward the painting. The frame had shifted only a few inches, yet the stone wall behind it appeared perfectly smooth, showing no sign that a hidden space had ever existed until moments ago. It was as though the chamber itself had quietly decided to reveal something that had always remained concealed. She carefully lifted the envelope from its resting place. The paper felt remarkably strong beneath her fingertips, neither brittle nor fragile like the old documents she had seen upstairs. Even the blue ribbon wrapped around it retained its rich color. "It is addressed to me," she said softly. "Not exactly," Leonardo replied. Taylor looked more closely. He was right. The elegant handwriting did not say Taylor Brooks. It simply read for Brooks alone. The realization settled heavily between them. Whoever had written the letter had not known her first name. They had only known the family name. Taylor swallowed slowly. "Should I open it?" Leonardo remained silent long enough that she wondered whether he would answer at all. Finally, he nodded once. "If it truly belongs to your family, no one else has the right." Taylor gently broke the wax seal. It separated with surprising ease, releasing the faint scent of cedar and dried lavender. Inside rested only a single folded sheet of cream-colored paper. No dust escaped, no pages crumbled. It looked almost impossibly well preserved. She unfolded it carefully. Instead of paragraphs, only one sentence appeared across the center of the page in graceful black ink. The writing was in English. "When the forgotten door remembers your voice, seek not the name, but the promise behind it." Taylor read the sentence twice, then a third time. "That is all?" she asked quietly. Leonardo accepted the letter only after she offered it to him. He studied every word with careful attention before slowly lowering the page. "This was not written as an explanation," he said. "It was written as instructions." Taylor leaned against the nearby marble column, trying to organize everything that had happened since the ballroom. A mysterious language she could briefly pronounce, a vanished manuscript, a hidden archive beneath Boston, a portrait carrying her family name, and now a letter apparently waiting centuries for someone named Brooks to discover it. Nothing fit together. "I still do not understand why any of this involves me," she admitted. "Neither do I," Leonardo answered honestly. "But one assumption no longer survives tonight." Taylor looked toward him. "Which assumption?" "That your presence here was an accident." Before she could respond, a quiet mechanical sound echoed from somewhere deeper within the chamber. Both of them turned instinctively. The crystal dome protecting the bronze medallion at the center of the room slowly lifted by itself no more than 2 inches before stopping. No hidden gears were visible. No motors hummed beneath the stone floor. It simply moved. The bronze medallion beneath it reflected the warm lights overhead, revealing details neither of them had noticed before. Along its outer edge were 12 tiny recessed circles, each surrounding one of the ancient symbols. 11 remained dark. One had begun glowing with a faint golden light. Taylor stepped closer, careful not to touch anything. "Did I do that?" she asked. Leonardo did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked from the glowing symbol to the letter still resting in his hand. "No," he said quietly. "You did something much more significant." Taylor waited for him to continue. Whatever awakened tonight did not respond to the spoken name alone. His voice grew softer. "It responded because someone carrying the Brooks name finally walked back into this place." A deep silence settled across the chamber once more. Taylor lowered her eyes toward the glowing medallion. Trying to convince herself there had to be an ordinary explanation hidden somewhere beneath the impossible events of the evening. Yet nothing about the chamber felt ordinary anymore, then almost too quietly to hear. Another sound drifted through the ancient passage beyond the columns. It was not machinery, it was not wind. It was the unmistakable sound of a second set of footsteps approaching from somewhere inside the forgotten archive. Even though Leonardo had insisted no one else had entered these sealed halls for hundreds of years, the approaching footsteps echoed through the forgotten archive with slow, measured precision before fading into silence just beyond the circle of marble columns. Taylor Brooks instinctively held her breath. The hidden chamber suddenly felt much smaller than before. She glanced toward Leonardo Vitali, expecting alarm, yet his expression remained composed. His eyes, however, were fixed on the darkness beyond the passage. He listened carefully for several long seconds before relaxing ever so slightly. "Who is there?" Taylor whispered. Leonardo answered without taking his eyes off the corridor. "No one living is standing there." The words sent a chill through the quiet room, though his voice carried neither fear nor urgency. He stepped toward the entrance leading deeper into the archive and waited. Nothing appeared. No shadow crossed the stone floor. No figure emerged from the darkness. Only silence answered. Then the faint sound returned, not as footsteps this time, but as the gentle rustle of old paper shifting somewhere beyond sight. Taylor slowly approached until she stood beside him. "You said this place has been sealed for centuries." "It has." "Then what are we hearing?" Leonardo finally looked at her. "Some places remember the people who once walked through them." Before Taylor could respond, the golden light surrounding the single glowing symbol on the bronze medallion brightened slightly. Both of them turned back toward the center of the chamber. Fine lines began spreading across the surface of the ancient metal, connecting one engraved symbol to another, like delicate streams of light flowing through hidden channels. They did not illuminate the entire circle. Instead, they stopped at a single point directly beneath the glowing symbol. A quiet click followed. The medallion slowly rotated only a few degrees before settling again. Beneath it, something long concealed became visible. It was not another mechanism. It was a single line of engraved words hidden underneath the bronze disc itself. Taylor leaned forward instinctively. The inscription was written in the same elegant language she had spoken inside the ballroom. She waited for the strange familiarity to return. It did not. The symbols remained unreadable. Leonardo studied them in silence. Then, for the first time that evening, he quietly spoke the truth he had guarded for centuries. "Those are not merely ancient letters," he said. "They record the first name." Taylor looked at him, puzzled. "The first name of whom?" Leonardo rested one hand lightly against the edge of the stone table, his voice growing quieter with every word. "Long before kingdoms existed, before royal bloodlines, before laws divided our world, it was the first name ever given to our kind." Taylor struggled to understand. "You mean before anyone was called a vampire?" He nodded once. "History remembers us by the name others eventually gave us. But our oldest identity was different. That first name united every family, every house, every generation." Taylor glanced back toward the hidden inscription beneath the medallion. "Then why erase it?" Leonardo remained silent for several moments. "Because names carry memory," he finally answered, "and memory carries power." His gaze drifted toward the ancient portraits surrounding the chamber. "Centuries ago, the royal court believed forgetting would protect both our world and yours. Every record containing the first name was hidden, every copy was sealed away, every person entrusted with preserving it vanished from history." Taylor's heartbeat quickened as fragments of the evening suddenly aligned, the missing manuscript, the impossible pronunciation, the portrait bearing the Brooks family name, the mysterious letter waiting behind the frame. None of them had been random. The woman in the portrait, she said softly. She helped preserve it. Leonardo looked directly at her. She was one of the final keepers of the first name. Taylor lowered her eyes. And the Brooks family? Leonardo drew a slow breath before answering. They were never guardians because of noble blood. They were chosen because they remembered what everyone else agreed to forget. The realization settled over Taylor more heavily than fear ever could. She had spent her entire life believing her family history was ordinary, marked only by faded photographs and stories that disappeared with older relatives. Now those missing stories suddenly felt deliberate. At that exact moment, the glowing symbol upon the medallion dimmed once before shining brighter than ever, and a second symbol beside it quietly awakened, as though the forgotten history beneath Boston had just recognized that the truth no longer belonged to the past alone. The second glowing symbol cast a warm circle of light across the ancient chamber. Reflecting softly against the crystal dome and the polished marble columns surrounding it, Taylor Brooks stood in complete silence, unable to pull her eyes away from the bronze medallion. Two symbols now shimmered where only one had glowed moments earlier. Whatever mechanism had remained dormant for centuries was responding to something far beyond chance. Leonardo Vital remained beside the stone table, his posture perfectly composed, yet Taylor noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders. Until tonight, every mystery had pointed toward forgotten history. Now history itself seemed to be answering back. If my family protected the first name, Taylor asked quietly, why did no one tell us? Leonardo looked toward the portraits lining the circular chamber before answering, because remembering eventually became more dangerous than forgetting. His voice carried neither pride nor regret. It carried the weight of experience. Each keeper accepted the same responsibility: preserve the truth until the day it could return without destroying everything built afterward. Taylor folded the letter carefully and slipped it back inside its envelope. Then someone believed that day would come. Someone believed your family would come back. She lowered her eyes toward the faded handwriting addressed only to Brooks. Suddenly it no longer felt impossible. It felt intentional. Every generation before hers had unknowingly carried the same family name. Whoever had written the letter had not needed to know which descendant would arrive. They only needed to trust that one eventually would. A quiet tone echoed through the chamber again, softer than before. This time it came directly from the bronze medallion. Fine rings of light spread outward from the two illuminated symbols, tracing delicate circles across the engraved surface before fading almost immediately. Leonardo stepped closer without touching it. It is responding more quickly now, he murmured. Taylor looked toward him. Because I am standing here, perhaps, he paused thoughtfully, or because the archive recognizes that the promise was never broken. Taylor remembered the single sentence inside the letter. Seek not the name, but the promise behind it. She repeated the words softly. What promise? Leonardo closed his eyes briefly, as though choosing carefully between silence and honesty. When he finally spoke, his voice had become noticeably quieter. 6 centuries ago, the leaders of every great house gathered beneath this very chamber. They faced a choice that would define every generation afterward: keep the first name alive and risk endless conflict, or hide it forever so that every family would stand equal beneath a new identity. Taylor listened without interrupting. The decision was not unanimous, he continued. Some believed memory should never be erased. Others believed peace demanded sacrifice. She slowly turned toward him. Which side were you on? For the first time that evening, Leonardo did not answer immediately. His silver-grey eyes settled on the glowing symbols before returning to hers. I was the one who gave the final order. The words settled over the chamber with extraordinary stillness. Taylor searched his face, expecting to find pride or defensiveness. Instead, she saw only quiet acceptance. You ordered every record destroyed? She asked gently. No. Leonardo shook his head. I ordered every record hidden. He glanced toward the surrounding portraits. The keepers convinced me that destroying history would eventually destroy us as well, so we chose another path. We concealed the truth instead of erasing it. Taylor looked around the chamber once more. The hidden passage, the portraits, the sealed letter, the untouched medallion. Everything around her existed because someone had refused to let history disappear completely. Then why has no one spoken about any of this since? Leonardo answered with remarkable honesty. Because I made certain no future ruler could reopen the archive by authority alone. Only someone connected to the keepers could awaken it again. Taylor slowly realized what that meant. You locked yourself out. Leonardo offered the faintest smile. Power should never be enough to rewrite history twice. The simplicity of his answer surprised her more than any revelation so far. She had expected the ancient king to defend his authority. Instead, he had limited it. Before either of them spoke again, the crystal dome above the medallion quietly descended into its original position. The two glowing symbols remained visible beneath the transparent surface, but the gentle light no longer spread across the chamber. Instead, it concentrated toward one narrow section of the circular floor. Taylor followed its path until an almost invisible line carved into the stone beneath their feet. It had not been there before. Slowly, gracefully, another concealed doorway began opening along the chamber wall. Warm light flowed through the widening gap, revealing shelves stretching far into the distance, each one filled with perfectly preserved volumes that had never appeared in any public archive. What Taylor Brooks did not yet understand was that the hidden library beyond that doorway contained the final surviving record capable of proving whether the first name had been hidden for wisdom or for fear. The newly revealed doorway opened without a sound, exposing a long gala light that seemed untouched by time. Taylor Brooks stood at the threshold, unable to decide whether she was looking at a hidden library or a sacred place preserved beyond ordinary history. Towering shelves stretched farther than she could immediately see, each one lined with leather-bound volumes whose spines bore no titles, only small embossed symbols matching those engraved upon the bronze medallion behind them. The air carried the comforting scent of cedar, parchment, and candle wax, yet no candles burned anywhere inside the chamber. Leonardo Vitale paused before entering, allowing Taylor to take the first step. She looked at him with quiet uncertainty. "You are letting me go first?" she asked. Leonardo nodded. "This archive no longer answers to me." His words felt almost impossible to believe. A king willingly surrendering authority over the greatest secret of his own people was not something Taylor had ever imagined. She crossed the threshold carefully. The polished stone beneath her shoes reflected soft ribbons of golden light flowing across the ceiling in delicate patterns that resembled slowly moving constellations. As she walked deeper into the gallery, several shelves emitted faint mechanical clicks before rotating slightly, rearranging themselves without anyone touching them. Leonardo observed the movement without surprise. "The archive remembers every keeper," he explained quietly. "It reorganizes itself according to the one it recognizes." Taylor looked around in amazement. "You mean it is changing because I am here?" "Not because you are here," Leonardo corrected gently. "Because it believes you belong here." She stopped beside one of the nearest shelves. Hundreds of journals rested there in perfect order, each marked only with a year instead of an author's name. The earliest dates reached back farther than the founding of the United States. Others extended into recent decades. One slim volume near eye level immediately caught her attention. Unlike every other journal, it bore a familiar surname stamped beneath the year. Brooks. She slowly reached toward it. Before her fingers touched the cover, Leonardo spoke quietly behind her. "That one has never been opened in my presence." Taylor carefully removed the journal. It felt surprisingly light. The leather remained soft despite its apparent age, and the pages turned effortlessly beneath her fingertips. Instead of elaborate histories, each page contained brief handwritten entries, everyone signed simply by a different member of the Brooks family. None identified themselves with titles or positions. They wrote about ordinary lives. One entry described teaching children to read in a small village. Another recorded tending an orchard through an unusually harsh winter. A later journal mentioned serving as a librarian in New York during the 1920s. Generation after generation had lived quiet, unremarkable lives. Yet each journal ended with the same single sentence written in identical handwriting. "We remembered without speaking." Taylor slowly closed the book. "They never tried to bring the truth back." Leonardo gently shook his head. Their duty was never to reveal it. Their duty was to preserve the possibility that one day someone else could. Taylor looked across the endless shelves. "Someone like me, perhaps." They continued walking until the gallery widened into another circular chamber. At its center stood an elegant oak table supporting a single oversized volume protected beneath crystal. Unlike the bronze medallion in the previous room, this book displayed no glowing symbols or hidden mechanisms. It simply rested there in complete stillness, as though waiting patiently through the centuries. Leonardo stopped several feet away. "This is the final surviving record." Taylor studied the enormous book with growing curiosity. "Can anyone read it?" "Only if the archive allows it." She approached slowly, the crystal cover quietly lifted on its own before she reached the table. Neither of them touched it. Taylor carefully opened the thick volume. Unfamiliar symbols, the first page displayed an intricate map unlike any modern chart. It showed cities, rivers, mountains, and coastlines connected by graceful lines of gold ink. At the very center appeared the same first name written in elegant script. This time Taylor did not pronounce it. She simply looked at it. The letters remained clear, understandable, almost inviting, yet she remembered the words inside the letter. Seek not the name, but the promise behind it. She turned the page. Beneath the map rested a formal declaration signed by representatives of every ancient house, including the keepers. At the bottom of the final page appeared one familiar signature written larger than all the others. Taylor slowly lifted her eyes toward him. "You did not erase history," she said softly. "You asked everyone to protect it together." Leonardo offered a quiet nod. "No kingdom survives forever," he replied. "But truth can survive if enough ordinary people choose to carry it." Taylor lowered her gaze back to the document. For the first time since entering the ballroom hours earlier, the impossible pieces of the mystery finally began fitting together. Yet just as understanding settled over her, a narrow folded page slipped gently from between the ancient leaves and drifted onto the table. Unlike every other document inside the archive, this page had never been sealed or catalogued. Across its top, written in fresh black ink that could not possibly belong to a 600-year-old manuscript, appeared a single sentence. "The council has already discovered the archive is open." The newly appeared page rested upon the ancient table with impossible freshness, its crisp edges untouched by age, while every surrounding manuscript carried the quiet dignity of centuries. Taylor Brooks carefully lifted the loose sheet, reading the single sentence once more. "The council has already discovered the archive is open." There was no signature, no seal, only those 11 words written with remarkable confidence. She looked toward Leonardo Vitali, expecting surprise, but instead she found recognition. He accepted the page gently, studying the handwriting for only a moment before placing it back exactly where it had landed. "Someone wanted us to know they are aware," he said quietly. Taylor folded her arms. "Who is the council?" Leonardo slowly walked toward one of the tall windows overlooking the endless shelves. "They are not rulers," he explained. "They are guardians of stability. For generations they believed preserving peace required preserving silence." Taylor glanced around the hidden library. "Then they are protecting the same secret you protected." Leonardo nodded slightly. "Yes, but our reasons are no longer the same." The distinction lingered between them. Taylor remembered every discovery made since the ballroom, the hidden letter, the journals, the portraits, the declaration signed by every ancient house. None of those records suggested fear. They suggested responsibility. "If the truth survived all this time," she asked, "why would anyone still want it hidden?" Leonardo answered with unusual honesty, "Because people often confuse what has always existed with what must always continue." Taylor slowly walked back to the great book resting upon the oak table. She looked once more at the declaration signed centuries earlier. Every signature represented agreement, not conquest. Every family had willingly accepted the burden of protecting memory until the proper moment arrived. "And you believe that moment has finally come?" Leonardo remained silent long enough that the answer became obvious before he spoke. "I believe the archive has already answered that question." As though responding to his words, another warm ripple of light spread quietly across the library ceiling. One shelf after another released soft mechanical clicks before rotating a few inches. Unlike before, the movement did not appear random. The shelves aligned themselves into a perfectly straight corridor leading toward the far end of the hidden library. Taylor watched the transformation with quiet amazement. "It is showing us something. It has never done this for me." They followed the newly formed passage together. The farther they walked, the newer the volumes appeared. Journals gave way to carefully bound ledgers. Ledgers gave way to modern archival boxes labeled with dates reaching into the present century. Finally, they arrived before a simple wooden cabinet standing alone beneath a circular skylight hidden high above. Moonlight filtered through thick glass, illuminating the cabinet with gentle silver light. There were no locks, no symbols, no hidden mechanisms. Taylor opened the doors carefully. Inside rested only one object. A small leather portfolio identical in size to the one the elderly curator had delivered earlier that evening. She lifted it onto a nearby reading table and opened the cover. Instead of ancient parchment, neatly organized newspaper clippings, photographs, and typed letters filled the portfolio. Every document came from the last 50 years. Families named Brooks appeared again and again. School photographs, Marriage announcements, library volunteer records, community events, nothing extraordinary. Nothing suggesting hidden guardians or forgotten archives. They had simply lived ordinary American lives. Taylor smiled softly at one faded photograph showing children reading books inside a small public library. They protected history by living normal lives, she whispered. Leonardo nodded. The greatest secret was never hidden inside castles or kingdoms. It survived because no one expected ordinary people to carry extraordinary responsibility. Taylor carefully turned another page. A final document rested beneath the photographs. It was a typed memorandum dated only 3 weeks earlier. Subject: final verification of Brooks' lineage. Status: active, assigned observer, Leonardo Vitali. Taylor looked up in surprise. You were watching my family. Leonardo met her gaze without attempting to avoid the truth. Only to ensure the line continued safely. Never to interfere. Did you know about me? I knew your name. I knew where you lived. I knew you worked 2 jobs and volunteered twice each month at the neighborhood literacy center. Taylor blinked in surprise. You knew all that? Because every keeper deserved quiet protection, even if they never discovered who they were. She searched his face for any sign of manipulation, but found only calm sincerity. Everything he described had happened without changing her life in any visible way. No mysterious gifts, no hidden fortune, no impossible rescue. Only distant protection from someone honoring a promise centuries old. Before either of them spoke again, a gentle chime echoed throughout the library. This one carried no warning. One by one, every volume resting upon the surrounding shelves opened exactly the same distance, their pages turning together until they stopped on matching passages. The hidden archive was no longer merely preserving its history. It was preparing to present the same truth to everyone who had once sworn never to speak it aloud. The gentle chime faded into complete silence as every open volume throughout the hidden library remained perfectly still, each resting on the exact same page. Taylor Brooks slowly walked toward the nearest shelf, her eyes moving from one ancient manuscript to another. Although the books differed in age, language, and appearance, every passage contained the same carefully illustrated emblem she had already seen on the bronze medallion. It was no longer simply a symbol. It was a signature repeated through 6 centuries of carefully preserved history. Leonardo Vitali quietly removed one of the open books from its shelf and placed it beside the Great Declaration resting on the oak table. Look carefully, he said. Taylor leaned over the pages. The handwriting was completely different, yet one sentence appeared in every record almost word for word. We preserve the first name so that no ruler may ever own it again. Taylor read the line several times before looking toward Leonardo. It was never hidden to protect power. Leonardo nodded. It was hidden to prevent power from claiming it. The distinction changed everything. Throughout the evening, Taylor had assumed the first name represented authority, perhaps even a forgotten title belonging to the earliest rulers. Instead, it represented something shared equally by every family. No king, council, or noble house could claim ownership over it, because it belonged to all of them. That is why the keepers existed, she whispered, not to hide the truth forever. Only until history became mature enough to receive it without turning it into another weapon, Leonardo replied. Taylor slowly closed the manuscript, and the archive believes that time has finally arrived. Before Leonardo could answer, the warm lights flowing across the ceiling gradually brightened, illuminating the far wall where a large stone panel had blended almost invisibly with the surrounding architecture. Fine lines spread across its surface like morning sunlight crossing still water. Then, with remarkable grace, the entire panel transformed into an enormous polished slab displaying hundreds of names carved into pale stone. There were no royal titles beside them, no family crests. Every name appeared in exactly the same size. Taylor stepped closer. What is this? The Covenant Wall, Leonardo answered softly. Every keeper, every witness, every ruler who accepted the promise. Taylor recognized several family names she had already encountered inside the journals. Brooks appeared again and again across different centuries. Beside it stood names belonging to houses she had never heard before, all sharing equal space. Near the center she found Leonardo Vitali engraved without any title, simply another name among hundreds. She looked back at him.
You removed your own rank?
Leonardo offered a faint smile. Inside this archive, no one stands above the promise. Taylor continued reading until she reached the newest inscription at the very bottom. Unlike every other name, this space remained unfinished. Only a single word had been carved into the stone, Brooks. No first name followed it. The empty space after the family name seemed intentional, waiting patiently for something still unresolved. It is not finished, Taylor observed. Leonardo slowly approached the wall. Because the archive never records a keeper until that person chooses freely, Taylor looked down at her hands. She had never asked for any of this. Only hours earlier she had been carrying champagne through a crowded ballroom, worried about earning enough money to cover next month's bills. Now centuries of forgotten history stood waiting for her decision. "What if I choose to walk away?" she asked honestly. Leonardo answered without hesitation, "Then the archive will close again, and every record will remain protected exactly as your family preserved them for generations." Taylor searched his face carefully. There was no disappointment, no pressure, no expectation. For the first time that evening she realized he had never once tried to convince her to accept any role. Every discovery had been her own choice. She turned back toward the unfinished inscription. The words inside the letter returned quietly to her memory. Seek not the name, but the promise behind it. She finally understood. The promise had never required extraordinary people. It required ordinary people willing to protect truth without possessing it. Slowly, Taylor placed her fingertips against the smooth stone beneath the unfinished family name. The surface felt pleasantly warm. A soft golden light spread outward beneath her hand before flowing gently across the covenant wall. One by one, every carved name shimmered briefly as though acknowledging her choice. The empty space beneath Brooks slowly filled with new letters carved by no visible hand. Taylor Brooks. She watched in complete silence as the final letter settled into the stone. At that exact moment, every open book throughout the hidden library quietly closed together, not as though history had ended, but as though 6 centuries of waiting had finally reached the ending they had always been written to protect. The final glow upon the covenant wall gradually softened until every carved name returned to the quiet dignity of polished stone. Taylor Brooks slowly lowered her hand, still unable to believe that her own name now rested among centuries of keepers who had protected a truth without ever seeking recognition for themselves. Nothing dramatic had happened. No triumphant ceremony had filled the chamber. The archive had responded with remarkable simplicity, almost as though it had merely completed a promise that had waited patiently through countless generations. Leonardo Vitali stood beside her without speaking. His attention remained fixed on the newly completed inscription before he quietly exhaled, releasing a breath that seemed far older than the building surrounding them. Taylor looked toward him. "You have been waiting a very long time." Leonardo offered a gentle smile that carried neither victory nor relief alone, but something much deeper. Long enough to forget what hope felt like. His words lingered between them. Throughout the evening, Taylor had watched him with caution, seeing only an elegant curator whose calm authority concealed countless unanswered questions. Now she understood the burden he had carried. For 6 centuries he had protected a decision that even he could not reverse. He had locked away the greatest truth of his own people and accepted that no king, including himself, would ever possess the authority to reclaim it. Only trust placed in ordinary lives could accomplish that. Taylor slowly turned back toward the great declaration resting upon the oak table. The signatures that had once seemed distant now felt deeply personal. Every generation had resisted the temptation to control history. Instead, they had chosen to preserve it until someone could receive it freely. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Leonardo walked toward the ancient volume and gently closed its heavy cover. Now the truth returns to its proper place. As though answering his words, spread through the hidden library one final time. This time nothing opened, rotated, or awakened. Instead, every shelf gradually settled into perfect stillness. The mechanical movements that had guided them throughout the evening quietly ceased. The hidden archive no longer searched for its keeper because it had already found one. Taylor watched as the loose page warning that the council had discovered the archive slowly dissolved into countless tiny points of light before disappearing completely. No ashes remained. No fragments fell to the floor. The warning had served its purpose and quietly surrendered itself to history. "Will the council come?" she asked. Leonardo nodded gently. "They already know the truth has been restored." Taylor instinctively glanced toward the entrance, expecting footsteps. Confrontation or another hidden challenge. None arrived. Leonardo seemed to understand her concern. "There will be no conflict," he said calmly. "The covenant they swore centuries ago binds them as completely as it binds me." He looked once more toward the wall of names. "Once the archive accepts a keeper, no council, no ruler, and no king may overturn its judgment." Till smiled faintly. "Then this was never about winning." "No," Leonardo replied. "It was always about remembering." They began walking slowly back through the endless gallery. The shelves remained quietly illuminated as they passed, each journal resting peacefully in its proper place. Taylor paused beside the volume bearing her family name and carefully returned it to the shelf where she had found it. It slid effortlessly into place between generations of ordinary lives that had quietly carried extraordinary responsibility. She no longer saw them as forgotten ancestors. She saw them as people who had chosen kindness, patience, and humility over recognition. Before leaving the gallery, Leonardo reached into his jacket and removed a small brass key attached to a faded blue ribbon. She hesitated before accepting it. She hesitated before she asked. "Nothing," Leonardo answered with a quiet smile. Taylor looked at the old key more closely. It had no teeth. It could never unlock any ordinary door. Then why keep it? Leonardo looked back toward the hidden library one final time, because every keeper carried it as a reminder that the greatest doors are opened by trust, never by force. Taylor wrapped her fingers gently around the smooth brass, understanding immediately why generations before her had preserved such an ordinary object. It had never been a key to a room, it had always been a key to a promise. As they stepped back into the ancient passage leading toward the reading room, the concealed doorway behind them slowly closed with silent grace until shelves of forgotten books once again hid every trace of the remarkable place they had just left. Yet this time the hidden archive did not disappear into secrecy. It simply rested, secure in the knowledge that its purpose had finally been fulfilled. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the grand Ashcroft ballroom, replacing the golden glow of chandeliers with the quiet warmth of a new day. The gala decorations had already been removed. Crystal glasses were gone. Tables stood neatly arranged for another ordinary event that would begin in only a few hours. To everyone walking through the building that morning, nothing appeared unusual. No one would have guessed that beneath the polished marble floor rested a hidden archive that had quietly fulfilled a promise 6 centuries in the making. Taylor Brooks stood alone beside the same display table where the evening had begun. The ancient parchment was no longer there. In its place rested a simple museum card describing the exhibit as temporarily unavailable for restoration. She smiled softly. Some truths no longer needed to announce themselves. They only needed to exist. Footsteps approached behind her with calm, familiar rhythm. Leonardo Vitale stopped beside the display without speaking at first. The silence between them no longer felt uncertain. It felt comfortable, built upon trust rather than unanswered questions. Taylor glanced toward him. "Everything looks so normal," Leonardo nodded. "That is usually how history continues after it quietly changes." She looked around the ballroom once more. Staff members arranged fresh flowers. Musicians tuned their instruments for another performance. Catering employees rolled in polished serving carts. The same ordinary routines that had surrounded her every working day suddenly seemed far more meaningful. She understood now that extraordinary moments rarely replaced ordinary life. Instead, they revealed its hidden value. Taylor reached into her pocket and gently held the small brass key attached to the faded blue ribbon. It remained exactly as Leonardo had given it to her, a key that opened nothing except a promise. "What happens to me now?" she asked. Leonardo answered with the same quiet honesty that had guided every conversation between them. "You return to your life." Taylor looked at him with mild surprise. "That is all? That has always been enough." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "After everything that happened last night, I expected my life to become completely different." Leonardo smiled, a genuine smile that softened the centuries resting quietly behind his eyes. "It already has, but not in the way stories usually describe." Together they walked toward the ballroom entrance. Guests had not yet arrived, leaving the enormous room peaceful and filled with morning light. As they reached the center of the floor, Taylor stopped and looked back one final time. She remembered the exact place where she had unknowingly spoken the forgotten name aloud. She remembered the silence that had followed, the frightened faces, the vanished manuscript, and the impossible journey beneath the city. None of it felt frightening anymore. It felt meaningful. "I never actually learned the first name," she said quietly. Leonardo followed her gaze across the empty ballroom. "No," he replied, "because in the end you discovered something more important." Taylor understood immediately. The promise behind the name had always mattered more than the name itself. Memory belonged to everyone, true to everyone. No king should possess it alone. No council should hide it forever. It survived because ordinary people quietly chose honesty over power, generation after generation. Leonardo gently reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a small leather notebook. He handed it to Taylor without ceremony. Inside the front cover appeared only one handwritten sentence. Even the oldest truths survive through ordinary acts of kindness. There were no royal seals, no titles, no signatures beyond his own simple name. Taylor carefully closed the notebook and held it beside the brass key. They stepped through the ballroom doors together and into the bright Boston morning. Cool autumn air drifted through the streets while people hurried toward work, carrying coffee cups, backpacks, and newspapers, completely unaware that history had quietly become a little more complete before sunrise. At the corner of the sidewalk, Taylor paused. Leonardo looked toward the busy city before answering. When history needs protecting, keepers are never truly alone. His words carried no mystery now, only reassurance. Taylor nodded with quiet confidence before turning toward the subway station she had used countless times before. She blended naturally into the morning crowd, another ordinary young woman beginning another ordinary day. Yet inside her coat pocket rested a simple brass key, and inside a promise that had outlasted kingdoms. Leonardo remained where he was, watching the city awaken beneath clear autumn skies. After a long moment, he quietly returned to the now empty ballroom. He walked to the center of the room where everything had begun, gently closed the antique book resting upon the display, and with one calm motion extinguished the final candle still glowing beside it. The room settled into peaceful silence once again, but this time it was no longer the silence of forgotten history. It was the silence of a promise finally fulfilled.